Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
The Daily Compliance News for April 5, 2021, the Pea in a Cup edition. And we begin with that story, as disgusting as it may sound, from the BBC. Amazon apologizes for wrongfully denying drivers needed to urinate in bottles. It is something that Amazon says does occur, and the company's apologized after evidence has emerged of this. We owe an apology, Amazon said. The policy does not reflect their company policy, but they do recognize that workers are forced to do that, particularly drivers. Amazon said, we know drivers can and do have trouble finding restrooms because of traffic and sometimes rural routes, and this has been especially true during COVID-19 when many public restrooms are solved, but it sees the problem as a long-standing industry-wide issue they would like to solve. Well, now you have it straight from Amazon's mouth that their drivers do have to use bottles to urinate, so all of their comments to the contrary are now disavowed. And there you have it. Next up, we have 3 articles from the FT. The first one is Andrew Hill, and is always great on management column. And it is in ways to avoid turning staff into lab rats. So the question is, if you treat your employees like experimental rodents, do not be surprised if they bite back. In other words, if you treat employees like animals, well, they're going to respond like animals. So if you are going to experiment, conduct covert experimentation, monitor workstations, keyboard strokes, and even individual movements, you're going to have lab rat mentality, and as Andrew Hill says, they are more than likely to bite you in the collective corporate Batuski. Our next story is that some good may actually come out of the 1MDB scandal, as Indonesia's sovereign wealth fund head has pledged that the multi-billion-dollar facility will avoid the traps that led to the collapse of the Malaysian 1MDB sovereign wealth fund. The Indonesian Investment Authority is aiming to grow as much as $100 billion. The UAE has become its first external investor with a $10 million pledge. The fund represents a test of Jakarta's capacity for good governance after the country was ranked 102 out of 180 nations at the TICPI. As everyone knows, the Malaysian fund imploded after a scandal where government officials and their associates misappropriated $4.5 million. So now the Indonesian fund says it will be run professionally, and it is being courted as a large investor by numerous parties. So perhaps something good will come out of 1MDB. Our final story also comes from the FT, and it involves the clothing manufacturers now and the aim of the Chinese government for their statements around forced labor of Chinese manufactured goods. The backlash in China has foreign clothing brands trying to distance themselves from cotton threads as opposed to being dragged into a diplomatic battle. The question becomes whether these clothing manufacturers will actually have a spine and stand up for what they believe in, or simply kowtow to the Chinese government, most particularly in the Chinese market. The Chinese market is recognized as one of the world's largest, perhaps the second largest behind the United States. Clothing manufacturers not known for really having a spine when it comes to these matters, although they say the right things. It's going to be interesting for them to watch going forward. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.